Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on April 12th, 2020, Easter Sunday. And my Easter Sunday prayer is a simple one. I'm praying for the resurrection of common sense. And I want to encourage everybody to share these videos and recordings if you're not already. I realize that it may be difficult material for some of your friends, family, and colleagues to listen to, accept, understand. But we've got to start the work of educating the public about what a terrible catastrophe this has been, based pretty much on fraud and hysteria and ignorance. And if not a deliberate misrepresentation of fact, a highly negligent and careless presentation of fact. So we're going to figure out, how do we unpack this thing? How do you unpack a fraud and well, fraud, we'll just call it a fraud. There's probably other words that we could use to describe it. But a hysteria, a delusion, really. This will go down, absolutely. There's a famous book called, I believe it's called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And this certainly will go down as the greatest example of that, possibly in human history. Okay, we've had things like the South Sea Bubble. We've had things like the Louisiana scam that took place in France in the 1700s. But this, in terms of economic destruction, it overshadows all of them. All right, so one thing we have to look at before we get to the main event is the projection that we were going to run out of ICU units, ICU beds, and ventilators. That drove a lot of the narrative. We had to shut down the economy to shut down the spread of the virus so that our ICU units wouldn't be overwhelmed. So where do those projections come from? Did anybody ask? No. They came from three sources, three main sources. Number one, McKinsey. What is McKinsey? McKinsey is an international consulting group of far reach. I've actually dealt with them in years past. I know people that have worked for them, and I'm fully aware of their scandal-ridden background. They do not walk on water. They're not gods, and they got these numbers so wrong, it's beyond belief. Who else created the scare that we were going to run out of ICU beds? Columbia University. Now, we've covered Columbia University before in two ways. One, their economics professors, including the head of the department, were intrinsically involved in creating the theories for pay that permitted Wall Street to engage in its huge mortgage fraud back in the mid-2000s. They said, everything's okay with what you're doing. That's Columbia University. They're also very involved in pushing the genetics bandwagon, which also includes putting an iron boot down on the necks of anybody that proposes treatment and healing methods that are not super expensive and super complicated. So that's Columbia University. They got the numbers exponentially wrong. And then the third big contributor to this fiasco, you won't be surprised, is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They had their people crunch numbers, and they also came out with wildly inflated expectations. The actual need turned out to be much less. Now, do IC units get overwhelmed? Absolutely. It happens every day somewhere on the planet. Okay? I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. If there is a four-car car crash, and there were three people on average in each car, there could be a problem at the local ICU. I heard a story about an ICU that got overloaded because one guy stabbed another guy and that guy shot him. And those two serious cases, and it's serious cases. One guy's bleeding to death. One guy's got lead throughout his system. It just took two serious cases to overwhelm the ICU. So yes, ICUs absolutely get overwhelmed. It's called emergency medicine, and hats off to the people that take that as a career. By the way, that's the career they chose. That's what they're getting paid for. They should know at least, the risks involved. It's not called tea time medicine. It's not called I'll be a dermatologist or a podiatrist and see people at a leisurely pace. It's called emergency medicine for a reason. But anyway, yes, ICUs can get overwhelmed. Happens all the time. By the way, Italy, which added to this hysteria, the stories about Italy. Italy has an ICU crisis every winter. Why? Because of the flu. Why? Because they operate on thin margins. By choice. It's a choice. And this year, the gamble they took did not pay off. They did not have enough beds and equipment to deal with the overage. Does that mean it's an indication of the end of the world? No. But thanks to the hysteria of Columbia University, McKinsey, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we shut down the world economy. Oxfam, which is raising money right now, their people estimate that 500 million, that's with a B, people around the world will be pushed into poverty by this. And that's a big number and maybe hard for people to wrap their minds around. I have trouble wrapping my mind around it. But half a billion is more people than in the entire United States. About 50, take all the population of the United States, add another 50%, and that's how many people we're talking about who were otherwise getting by, surviving, making a living, supporting themselves and their families, who are now going to be pushed over the edge into poverty. That's how serious this is. And that's why we need to get educated and help other people get educated about it. So when you try to unwrap a delusion, a hysteria, a fraud, how do you do it? Where do you even start? One thing you can do is start by talking to experts. And you may say, well, gee, the experts have already weighed in. I see them on TV every night. I see them standing by the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of England or the Chancellor of Germany or the Prime Minister of Japan. They're out there. They're telling us. They're the experts. Well, they're a sort of expert. They're careerist. They're heavily politicized. They have personal agendas. And they're giving you the view from that vantage point. And then there are also professionals, this shouldn't be a surprise, who love to exaggerate because it increases their fees. It increases the demand for their services. If you are a careerist public health official and you had a hysterical story to tell in the last several weeks, I guarantee you would have been on TV. And there are people for whom being on TV is more important than anything else, including being accurate and educating the public in a sane and rational way. So yes, I don't deny that we've had experts on TV 24/7 telling you that the world is going to come to an end, that in fact, we must bring the world to an end in order to stop the transmission of a seasonal respiratory illness. We have seasonal respiratory illnesses every winter. We have since the beginning of humanity. Oh, but it's a coronavirus. There have been many coronaviruses. The idea that this is a never before seen, completely mysterious, beyond the ability of mankind to fathom. Well, maybe that's the case for the moment. But nature knows how to handle this. And we're going to talk to the experts, or we're going to read what the experts have to say about this whole process. Because humanity's been around a long time, right? We didn't all die out suddenly because of a seasonal respiratory problem, right? And yet, and one of the reasons that motivates me to do this is, I mean, I'm seeing people in absolute terror, and I object. I really object to seeing people terrorized like this. We go for walks in the woods, and we see people in the woods, far from humanity, in a completely natural, healthy setting, wearing face masks. Now, we're not talking about people with, severely compromised immunity. We're talking about just normal, healthy, everyday people. I saw a young couple push, again, outdoors, outside, in a little village, no car traffic, no nothing, certainly no people around. And the father's wearing a full-fledged face mask, the mother's wearing a face mask, and the baby's wearing a face mask. And I'm thinking, oh my God, there's a thing called tuberculosis, and it kills over 1 million people every year, like clockwork, and it's highly contagious. And it's treatable. Treatment's not really good. Treatment's a really good precursor for ruining your immune system and developing cancer. But there is a treatment for it. But 1 million people die of it every year. And it used to be much worse. Before the development of antibiotics, which is the treatment, the cure was fresh air and sunlight and nutritious food. Yogurt, believe it or not. My better half's mom, who was born, I believe, in the 1920s, was cured of tuberculosis by her dad, who made her yogurt every night, or for her to eat every day. But sunlight, fresh air. So even if this were the greatest pandemic that mankind has ever seen, we should all be outdoors in the sunlight. That would be the thing to do. So what have they told us instead? Stay indoors, stay home. Now, we've done a lot of recordings, programs over the past about what a contaminated mess the indoor air of most homes is. I just posted an article related to this, and also has to do with tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is very contagious, and guess who gets it a lot? Healthcare workers. That's the nature of healthcare work. And again, God bless these people. They put themselves on the line. But it ain't just about this virus. There's a lot of contagious things that pass through hospitals that healthcare workers get. Wish I could remember the South American country, Peru. There was one hospital where in 1 year, 30% of the emergency room workers caught tuberculosis. 30% in 1 year. That's a bad disease. That's a dying disease. You can treat it, but it's a bad disease, and people do die of it. So why so much tuberculosis in these hospitals? Well, the new and improved modern hospitals have windows that don't open, don't they? Why? To save money on energy costs. Why? Because medicine is a factory, not a profession. It's factory work. They went and they looked at the old hospitals built, before the modern era, and they found that they had tuberculosis infection rates in the hospital over 66% less. The modern hospitals have very expensive air systems, HVACs, and air cooling, air heating, air circulating. Very expensive. The old hospitals had none of that. Some of them still exist. What they did have was high ceilings, big windows, and they were designed for cross ventilation. And without any additional investment of any kind and no special maintenance costs, their tuberculosis infection rate is 2/3 less than the brand new, modern, shiny hospitals that are being built that provide no fresh air, no daylight. Now, this relates to the nursing homes. If anybody's ever visited a nursing home, even a nicely run one by nice people, they are like rabbit warrens. They are modern. They are lit by fluorescent light. They have no cross ventilation. They have no fresh air. They have no sunlight. If somebody doesn't take the patients out into the day light and the sunlight, they will get none. And they're in close quarters with no fresh air circulating. And they're already obviously challenged. That's why they're in a nursing home. Are we surprised that when a virus of any kind gets into a nursing home, that there is a great deal of death? We shouldn't be. What we should know is what percentage of the people who are dying of this are actually in institutionalized settings. And that we're not being told, because if we were told that includes hospitals, people that get it in the hospital and die in the hospital. And we're not being told that because if we were told that, it would blow the whole hysteria story. We would realize, oh, it's the very ill who tend to get this and have a bad reaction, and they're getting it in hospitals, nursing homes, and other closed institutions. But let's get to the experts. We have 12 that we're going to look at. And this article, by the way, comes from a publication. I don't know these folks, but they're wonderful. It's called off-guardian.org. Off-guardian.org. 12 experts questioning the coronavirus panic. So the first one, Dr. Suchart Bakati. He's a specialist in microbiology. He was a professor at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, and he was the head of the Institute for Medical Microbiology and Hygiene, and one of the most cited research scientists in German history. Okay, this is not a guy that, he's in his mid-40s and he's dependent on National Institute of Health research grants and he's currying favor with the NIH. This is a guy who's one of the most cited research scientists in German history. Folks, there have been a lot of scientists in Germany over the years. Okay, to somehow be one of the most cited ones in all of German history, that's like saying the best soccer player ever in Brazil, or the best basketball player ever in America, or the best sumo wrestler ever in Japan. And it's even more significant and impressive. So here's what he says. We are afraid that 1 million infections with the new virus will lead to 30 deaths per day over the next 100 days. But we do not realize that 20, 30, 40, or 100 patients positive for normal coronaviruses are already dying every day. The government's anti-COVID-19 measures are grotesque, absurd, and very dangerous. The life expectancy of millions is being shortened. The horrifying impact on the world economy threatens the existence of countless people. The consequences on medical care are profound. Already, services to patients in need are reduced, operations are canceled, practices are empty, hospital personnel dwindling. All this will impact profoundly on our whole society. All these measures are leading to self-destruction and collective suicide based on nothing but a spook. What he means is a scare. All right, Dr. Wolfgang Wodarg, German physician specializing in pulmonology. That's the doctors that are treating this disease. He's a politician, and he's the former chairman of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. In 2009, he called for an inquiry into alleged conflicts of interest surrounding the EU response to the swine flu pandemic. Okay, so he's a doctor and he's an activist, and he's aware of conflicts of interest when it comes to the EU response to the swine flu epidemic. And here's what Dr. Woodard says. Politicians are being courted by scientists who want to be important to get money for their institutions, scientists who just swim along in the mainstream and want their part of it. And what is missing now is a rational way of looking at things. We should be asking questions like, how did you find out this virus was dangerous? How was it before? Didn't we have something the same last year? Is it even something new? That's missing. How about Dr. Joel Kettner, professor of community health sciences and surgery at Manitoba, former chief public health officer for the Manitoba province, and medical director of the International Center for Infectious Diseases. Feeling like I need to repeat that. He was the chief public health officer for a Canadian province, and he is the medical director, or was the medical director of the International Center for Infectious Diseases. Dr. Joel Kettner, what does he say? I have never seen anything like this, anything anywhere near like this. I'm not talking about the pandemic because I've seen 30 of them, one every year. It's called influenza and other respiratory illness viruses. We don't always know what they are, but I've never seen this reaction, and I'm trying to understand why. I worry about the message to the public, about the fear of coming into contact with people, being in the same space with people, shaking their hands, having meetings with people. I worry about many, many consequences related to that. In Hubei, in the province of Hubei, where there have been the most cases and deaths so far, the actual number of cases reported is 1 per 1,000 people, and the actual rate of death reported is 1 per 20,000. So maybe that would help put us into perspective. Now, we have Dr. John Ioannidis, professor of medicine, of health research and policy, and of biomedical data science at the Stanford University School of Medicine, and professor of statistics at the Stanford University School of Humanities and Sciences. He is the director of the Stanford Prevention Research Center and the co-director of the Meta Research Innovation Center at Stanford. He's also the editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Clinical Investigation. He was chairman of the Department of Hygiene and Epidemiology, University of Ioannina School of Medicine, as well as an adjunct professor at Tufts University School of Medicine. I mean, does he need to be more qualified? Patients who have been tested for SARS-CoV-2, which is the real name of this thing, are disproportionately those with severe symptoms and bad outcomes. As most health systems have limited testing capacity, selection bias may even worsen in the near future. The one situation where an entire closed population was tested was the Diamond Princess cruise ship and its quarantined passengers. The case fatality rate there was 1%, but this was a largely elderly population in which the death rate from COVID-19 is much higher. Could the COVID case fatality rate be that low? No, some say, pointing to the high rate in elderly people. However, even some so-called mild or common cold type coronaviruses that have been known for decades can cause fatality rates as high as 8% when they infect elderly people in nursing homes. If we had not known about a new virus out there and had not checked individuals with PCR tests, the number of total deaths due to, quote, influenza-type illnesses would not seem unusual this year. At most, we might have casually noted that flu this season seems to be a bit worse than average. This is a professor of medicine and biomedical data science. Okay, next, Dr. Yoram Lass. He's an Israeli physician, politician, and former director general of Israel's health ministry. By the way, you're noticing these guys are either tenured or they're retired. In other words, they're bulletproof. They can speak the truth. They're not worried about retaliation from the National Institute of Health. I also have to say, have you seen any of these people on the news media? No. All you see are the people peddling hysteria. And the people you see peddling hysteria are second-rate, careerist, I don't even want to call them scientists, with an agenda of personal advancement. And the guys that actually know what's going on and have far greater credentials are being systematically ignored and not given a platform to speak to the news media. And the news media stories drive the politicians, and the politicians have driven this catastrophe. So anyway, Dr. Yoram Lass, former Director General of the Health Ministry of Israel. Here's what he says. Italy is known for its enormous morbidity in respiratory problems, more than 3 times any other European country. In the U.S., about 40,000 people die in a regular flu season, and so far 40 to 50 people have died of the coronavirus, most of them in a nursing home in Kirkland, Washington. Okay, obviously those numbers have changed. But notice this is a nursing home phenomenon. It's not a general public phenomenon. In every country, more people die from regular flu compared to those who die from the coronavirus. That will probably be the case this year as well. There's a very good example that we all forget, the swine flu in 2009. That was a virus that reached the world from Mexico, and until today, there is no vaccine against it. But so what? At that time, there was no Facebook, and there maybe there was, but it was still in its infancy. The coronavirus, in contrast, is a virus with public relations. Whoever thinks that governments end viruses is wrong. Okay, and let me just double back here. That's the former Director General of the Health Ministry of Israel, also was Associate Dean at the Tel Aviv University Medical School. This is a physician, a doctor, who is keenly interested in public health. Next doctor, Dr. Pietro Vernazza. He's a Swiss physician specializing in infectious diseases at the Cantonal Hospital, St. Gallen, and professor of health policy. We have reliable figures from Italy and a work by epidemiologists which has been published in the renowned science journal Science, which examined the spread in China. This makes it clear that around 85% of all infections have occurred without anyone noticing the infection. 90% of the deceased patients are verifiably over 70 years old, 50 over 80 years old. Is it a sad thing when a beloved family member dies? Of course. It happens every year with every flu and cold season. In Italy, 1 in 10 people diagnosed die, according to the findings of the Science publication. That is statistically 1 of every 1,000 people infected. Each individual case is tragic, but often similar to the flu season. It affects people who are at the end of their lives. Now, when he's talking about diagnoses, he was talking about way back when the diagnoses were very rare. And somebody else made the point in this that the general public isn't being tested. It's people that are already extremely sick who are being tested. Then they find out, yes, in addition to all their other health problems, they've got this virus. And of those people, that small percentage, people that have extreme symptoms, people that have been tested and found positive, of all those people, it's 1 out of 10, which is 1 out of 1,000 who have the the visible effect infection. That's anyway. If we close the schools, we will prevent the children from quickly becoming immune. We should better integrate the scientific facts into the political decision. Next, Frank Ulrich Montgomery, German radiologist and the former president of the German Medical Association and the deputy chairman of the World Medical Association. I'm not a fan of the lockdown. Anyone who imposes something like this must also say when and how to pick it up again. Since we have to assume that the virus will be with us for a long time, I wonder when we will return to normal. You can't keep schools and day centers closed until the end of the year because it will take at least that long until we have a vaccine. Italy has imposed a lockdown and it had the opposite effect. They quickly reached their capacity limits, but did not slow the virus spread down within the lockdown. This is his quote from mid-March. Professor Henrik Streeck is a German HIV researcher, epidemiologist, and clinical trialist. He is a professor of virology, and he's the director of the Institute of Virology and HIV Research at Bonn University. Here's what he says. The new pathogen is not that dangerous. It is even less dangerous than SARS-1. The special thing is that SARS-CoV-2 replicates in the upper throat area and therefore much more infectious because the virus jumps from throat to throat, so to speak. But that is also an advantage because SARS-1 replicates in the deep lungs. It is not so the CoV-2 is not so infectious, but definitely gets on the lungs, which makes it more dangerous. That's what SARS-1 does. So I'm sorry I mangled that a little bit. You have to take into account that the SARS-CoV-2 deaths in Germany were exclusively old people. For example, in Heisenberg, a 70-year-old man with previous illness died of heart failure, and that without SARS-2 lung involvement. Since he was infected, he naturally appears in the COVID-19 statistics. But the question is whether he would not have died anyway, even with SARS-2. So here's the thing. Guy dies of heart disease. He didn't have COVID symptoms, but they do an autopsy and they find COVID. There was no involvement. There was no lung damage. But he's going to be included in the statistics anyway. That's the policy, by the way, of the United States. If you die of a heart attack, if you die of a brain aneurysm, if you die of any one of a million causes, and they do an autopsy, and you also had COVID-19, even if there were no symptoms of COVID-19, which are lung damage, they will call you a COVID-19 case. This is why we're getting these wildly inflated numbers in April. And I could go on and on and on. How about Dr. David Katz, American physician, founding director of the Yale University Prevention Research Center. Yale University Prevention Research Center, founding director, physician. I am deeply concerned that the social, economic, and public health consequences of this near total meltdown in normal life, schools and businesses closed, gatherings banned, will be long-lasting and calamitous, possibly graver than the direct call of the virus itself. The stock market will bounce back in time, but many businesses never will. the unemployment, impoverishment, and despair likely to result will be a public health scourge of the first order. Dr. Peter Goetze, professor of clinical research design and analysis at the University of Copenhagen and founder of the Cochrane Medical Collaboration. He has written several books on corruption in the field of medicine and the power of big pharmaceutical companies. Here's what he says. Our main problem is no one will ever get in trouble for measures that are too draconian. They will only get in trouble if they do too little. So our politicians and those working with public health do much more than they should do. No such draconian measures were applied during the 2009 influenza pandemic, and they obviously cannot be applied every winter, which is all year round, as it is always winter somewhere. We cannot close down the whole world permanently. Should it turn out that the epidemic wanes before long, there will be a queue of people waiting to take credit for this. And we can be damn sure that draconian measures will be applied next time. But remember the joke about tigers? I guess it's a Danish joke because I never heard it. Why do you blow the horn? To keep the tigers away. But there are no tigers. There, you see? It works. And we could go on and on and on. By the way, this comes from a group, the research comes from a group called the Swiss Propaganda Research Group. God bless them. This is the kind of thing that we need to do. We need to seek out legitimate experts who don't have personal gains to be had by spreading panic, and we need to listen to them. I don't know where all this is going to lead, but please share this, because the only way people are going to hear about this is if they hear about it from friends, family, and colleagues. You know, and just to do a little rewind on this, we are quoting not random people off the street. We're quoting some of the most esteemed public health and virology, infectious disease experts in the world. Yes, you, an average citizen, me, an average citizen, have never looked at the horrors of the annual respiratory influenza disease that travels the globe. It happens every year. And I guess that's one of their main memes, was to try to say, this isn't just a regular flu. Well, it's different, just like every year it's a little bit different, but in terms of shape and scope and size and impact, it's no different. But what is different is we have destroyed the world economy, and by destroyed I mean knocked it out. If it were a fist fight and we hit somebody this hard and they fell over and were lying down on the canvas, you could say destroyed. We've destroyed the world economy, and more frightening even than this catastrophe that they've created is they have created a precedent for doing things like this whenever they feel like it every year. And this is a triumph of the pharmaceutical industry, by the way. This is total victory for them. This is, Pearl Harbor, with the Japanese coming in and bombing the Seventh Fleet and sending it to the watery grave. This is a total victory. The pharmaceutical industry has a very simple goal: is to persuade every human being that they are so frail and fragile that they need the protection of the pharmaceutical industry and its products and services. Okay? Yes, sometimes people get sick, and sometimes there is a pharmaceutical solution for that illness. But the idea that we can't maintain everyday humanity without draconian interventions. And let's talk about where these draconian interventions are going. On US TV, I don't know what it's like in other parts of the world, they're already suggesting things like everybody will have a ID that will show whether they are up to date on all the various vaccines that are required to keep everybody safe, that they have the right antibodies, and so on. And why would you need an ID like that? To gain access to transportation, to gain access to schools, to gain access to hospitals, to gain access to supermarkets. And there was a patent that some MIT scientists were crowing about several months ago before all this started, was a little electronic tattoo. It's very possible to make electronics so super small. And this would basically be injected into your skin, and it would stay there permanently, and it would be programmable, so they could update. Oh yes, Johnny got his measles vaccine, and oh, he got his annual flu vaccine. We don't know that the flu vaccine is even going to work because we don't know what the flu is going to be this year, but we started making it 6 months ago, and now it's ready to inject into you. And yes, he got his flu vaccine, and yes, he can get on the train, and he can get on the plane, and he can stay in the hotel, and he can go to school, and he can go to the library, and he can go to the doctor, and he can go to the sporting events, and he can go to the private music lessons, and he can go to the supermarket. This is technologically possible. Silicon Valley would love this. They're always looking for places to put chips. And how wonderful it would be for them to be able to chip, how many billion people do we have now? And the Securitans, there was a very wild man named Sean Ryder, who's still around. He was a singer for a Manchester group called the Happy Mondays, and he was a great coiner of phrases and words, and he talked about the Securitans. Right? We got the Puritans, and then we have the security-minded. This is a triumph for the Securitans. We have Los Angeles, the park system of Los Angeles, the gardens, the public gardens, and so on, closed because people aren't following the distancing rules. We have police officers in Philadelphia tearing people, ripping people off public transport because they're on public transport without a mask. Even in my otherwise pretty sane village and my otherwise pretty sane local mayor, we have a great consternation that young people are in the park playing basketball and skateboarding because they're not home, they're not wearing masks, and they're not maintaining social distancing. So please share this, and I'll put a link to the article so you can read it yourself. Again, but it's from the offguardian.org, off-guardian.org, and it is the work of a group called the Swiss Propaganda Research. And their website, let me give you an exact URL for them too, swprs.org, swprs.org, and they have been tracking this catastrophe very closely. Oh boy, I mean, here's one of their quotes. Now, we all know who Henry Kissinger is. One of the most sinister power figures who's lived in the last 100 years. And here's his take. The coronavirus pandemic will forever alter the world order. The U.S. must protect its citizens from disease while starting the urgent work of planning for a new epoch. Yeah, please share this. We've got to wake up.